Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. Rudyard Kipling's poem If begins, "If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you."
I love that poem. And what a great start.
It's a brilliant start. It's a great way to describe the blame game.
The blame game. Tell me more. What is the blame game?
The blame game is that process by which people excuse their behaviours by blaming it on circumstances around them or other people's behaviours.
And we all do that all the time.
We do all do that all the time. There is part of it that because as human beings we want to avoid discomfort as much as possible, we do try to look for the easy option. And for us, what can be most comfortable is not accepting responsibility. As human beings, it's more comfortable to not accept responsibility because then the buck doesn't stop with us.
Right. Doing the right thing is a difficult thing.
Sometimes.
And when people don't do that, they'll have some excuse as to why they didn't do it or why they couldn't do it. Oh, I was late because of traffic.
And that's a very good example of the blame game because rather than, we set off too late, we stay in bed too long or whatever it is, we set off too late and we're going to be late. And rather than setting off early and being on time, we spend our journey thinking up excuses for why we're late.
Oh, there's a road cone.
It's traffic.
It's traffic, yeah, exactly.
So I think the blame game is extremely prevalent in our culture.
Okay, so what's the end result of people playing the blame game?
Well, there's two main things. The first is arrogance. Arrogance comes from refusing to accept responsibility. Because if it's always somebody else's fault, it's not our fault, then we get this falsely inflated sense of self-worth, which gives us the arrogance.
Right, you think you're perfect and the problem's always with someone else.
Right.
Yeah.
And the second one is victimhood. We're not responsible for our behaviours because somebody else has impacted us in some way and it's their fault. Right.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, that's a sport in and of itself these days, as everyone's trying to play the victimhood Olympics and claim, so I was an orphan, or I wasn't given
the same opportunities.
Or my mum fed me mashed potato when I hated it, and yeah.
Well, I am this way because my mum fed me mashed potatoes example is actually quite a good one, because one of the big tropes in the blame game is blaming our parents.
Oh, now that reminds me of a great scene from Rocky Balboa, the movie. Oh. I love that movie, but there's a particular scene within it where Rocky Balboa is having a conversation with his son, and his son is unhappy with his father going through with this fight, and he's saying it's negatively impacting upon him. There's a couple of lines in there. I won't do the whole monologue, but just pick out these two parts of it. At one point he says, when the things got hard, you started looking for something to blame, like a big shadow. So that's blame.
Yes.
And then later on in the monologue he says, now if you know what you're worth, then go out and get what you're worth, but you gotta be willing to take the hits and not be pointing fingers saying you ain't where you want to be because of him or her or anybody. Cowards do that, and that ain't you.
I love that scene because he is encouraging his son to take responsibility, and it also brings us to this idea of courage or cowardice.
Yeah, he mentions cowardice and courage in that, you're right, in that monologue.
And responsibility as a virtue is an expression of courage. Sometimes, it does take courage to not play the blame game.
Because it's difficult, and we talked about this in a previous podcast, courage as a virtue is required for any other practice of a virtue, because it's when you do things that are difficult, you need that courage to get you over the line, to get you started.
Yes. And the other thing he mentions is, he says, if you know what you're worth, go out and get what you're worth, but you've got to be willing to take the hits. And I think that's a really good depiction of the rough with the smooth.
Yes.
There's no path through life that is going to be completely smooth and all your way. There's going to be ups and downs in life. And we've got to be able to deal with the hits, the downs, without blaming others around us for those things.
I've also looked at a lot of life's trials as an opportunity to learn something. You know, to grow in your wisdom or to do things differently. And, you know, there's an old saying about every story in 5 chapters. I walk down a road, I fall into a hole, I can't believe I fell into a hole, it takes me ages to get out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street, I see the hole, I fall in it again, I can't believe I've done it again. Third day, third chapter, I walk in, I see it, I try to step around it, but I still manage to fall in. 4th day, I walk down a different street.
What about the 5th day?
There was 5 days, was there?
Sorry.
I shortened it.
Yeah, you improved on it.
Short stories are good stories.
I agree. That's one of the things, is that when things don't go as we hoped, you know, we all set out with a plan.
You end up with 4 chapters instead of 5.
Exactly. So when things don't go as we hoped, then we need to look at what we could have done better ourselves, or how we're going to, you might call it blossom where you're planted, how we're going to make the best of the situation we find ourselves in.
Yes.
And not blame others or circumstances or pout about it. And they do say that there is a saying, when life brings you lemons, make lemonade. And that's an idea of, rather than going, oh, I've got lemons.
Usually people associate that with attitude, that you've got to have the right attitude.
Well, I think that's a big thing, is the blame game is about attitude.
Yes.
So rather than blaming others or circumstances, it's about taking responsibility, and it's about having the right attitude for all the situations that we're faced with.
So it's about ourselves. We've got to look at, and in a way, it's kind of an empowering thing, I would have thought, because it's affirming your agency, and that you may not be able to control other people or things in the environment.
Well, you definitely can't control.
But you can control yourself.
Exactly. And I think that's what the poem is saying, is that if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, and that is a case of, rather than falling into the same trap of blaming others,
yes,
you're keeping your head, you're keeping your own self-responsibility and being a grown-up and taking responsibility for your actions.
Maybe you'll get out of that hole in chapter 2 instead of chapter 5.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.